The death threat arrived on a Tuesday morning, typed in stark black letters against white paper. Magnus Chen, rising star of independent cinema, stared at it while his manager Lisa paced the living room of his Los Angeles penthouse. "That's the third one this month," Lisa said, running her fingers through her graying hair. "We need professional protection, Alex. No more arguments." Magnus knew she was right. His latest film, a powerful drama about a gay athlete fighting discrimination in professional sports, had thrust him into the spotlight and drawn both praise and vitriol. "Fine," he conceded. "But I want someone discreet. No hulking bodyguards in dark glasses following me everywhere." 2 days later, Axton Reynolds walked into his life. He wasn't what Magnus had expected. Instead of an intimidating giant, Axton was elegant in his efficiency, 6 feet of contained power in a perfectly tailored suit. His dark hair was threaded with silver at the temples, and his brown eyes assessed everything with military precision. "Your security setup is inadequate," were his first words, spoken in a deep voice that carried natural authority. "The service entrance needs better surveillance, and your private elevator requires restricted access protocols." "Hello to you too," Magnus replied, amused despite himself. Axton didn't smile. "Mr. Chen, if you're looking for someone to exchange pleasantries while leaving you vulnerable to actual threats, I suggest hiring a different security consultant. And here I thought we'd bond over coffee and swap life stories." Magnus replied with a playful smirk, trying to lighten the mood. Axton merely adjusted his earpiece. "The only stories I'm interested in are your daily schedules and security briefings." The first month was an adjustment period filled with friction. Axton implemented strict protocols that Magnus found suffocating. No unscheduled public appearances. No impromptu meetings with fans. Every visitor was extensively kicked out. Their daily routine became a dance of subtle power struggles. When Magnus tried sneaking out for his morning coffee run, Axton would somehow materialize in the lobby before him. "The coffee machine in your kitchen is perfectly adequate, Mr. Chen," he'd say, steering Magnus back to the elevator. "The coffee shop's croissants are better," Magnus would argue. "Then I'll have them delivered, after they're properly screened." During script readings at home, Magnus would deliberately prop his feet on the coffee table, just to see Axton's eye twitch. The bodyguard's military precision demanded everything be in its proper place, including Magnus. Magnus said one afternoon, while Axton was checking the windows for the 3rd time that day, "Most people would say you're taking this job a bit too seriously." Axton paused, giving him a look that could have frozen water. "Most people aren't responsible for keeping Hollywood's rising star alive. And most people haven't received the kind of threats you have." Something in his tone made Magnus sit up straighter. "You've read all of them, haven't you? The threats? Every single one." Axton's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Which is why you'll follow my protocols, Mr. Chen, whether you find them suffocating or not." It was the first crack in Axton's professional veneer, a glimpse of genuine concern beneath the rigid exterior. After that, Magnus found himself testing boundaries less and observing his stoic protector more, intrigued by the man who took his safety so personally. Weeks turned into months. Magnus began to notice things about Axton. How his posture relaxed marginally when they were alone in the penthouse, the rare quirk of his lips when Magnus made a particularly bad joke, the gentleness in his hands when he would guide Magnus through crowds. Their first real conversation happened 3 months into their professional relationship. Magnus couldn't sleep and found Axton in the kitchen at 2 a.m., making coffee. "Nightmares?" Axton asked, surprising Magnus by pushing a second mug toward him. "Sometimes fame feels like drowning," Magnus admitted. "Everyone wants a piece of you until there's nothing left." Axton was quiet for a moment. "In the military, we had a saying, 'The weight of the armor is the price of survival.' Is that why you're always so defended?" "We all have our armor, Mr. Chen. Some of us just wear it better than others." After that night, something shifted. Axton still maintained his professional distance, but their conversations grew longer, deeper. Magnus learned that Axton had served 15 years in special forces before an injury forced him to retire. He discovered that Axton had a younger sister who taught elementary school in Seattle, and that he read classical literature in his rare moments of downtime. In turn, Magnus shared parts of himself he usually kept hidden. His parents' disappointment when he chose acting over medical school, his struggles with anxiety, his fear of letting down the LGBTQ+ youth who saw him as a role model. 6 months into their arrangement, they attended a film festival in Toronto. During a break between screenings, they walked through High Park, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. "You can call me Alex, Magnus said. After 6 months, Mr. Chen seems a bit formal. Axton glanced at him, something unreadable in his expression. Professional boundaries exist for a reason. Do they? Or are they just another form of armor? Before Axton could respond, he spotted something suspicious and smoothly maneuvered Magnus behind a tree. It turned out to be nothing, just a photographer with an oversized lens. But Magnus found himself hyper-aware of Axton's hand on his waist, the warmth of his body so close. That moment in the park shifted something between them. Over the next few weeks, Magnus noticed Axton watching him with a different kind of attention. During movie screenings in the Penthouse home theater, Axton would sit closer than strictly necessary for security. When Magnus fell asleep during late-night script readings, he'd wake to find a blanket draped over him, something the old Axton would have considered outside his professional duties. Their conversations began stretching longer into the evening. One night, over takeout Chinese food, Axton surprised Magnus by asking about his latest role. "You've never shown interest in my acting before," Magnus said, watching Axton struggle with chopsticks. "I always pay attention," Axton replied quietly. "I just usually keep my observations to myself." "Professional boundaries?" Magnus teased, but his heart wasn't in the joke anymore. Axton set down his chopsticks. "Sometimes boundaries exist because we're afraid of what might happen without them." They started sharing more meals together, Axton gradually relaxing his rigid posture during their dinners. He began offering small insights into his life stories about his military service, memories of his childhood in Seattle. Magnus treasured each revelation like a gift. During a charity event in Chicago, Magnus had a panic attack before his speech. Instead of calling for the event coordinator, Axton guided him to a quiet corner backstage. "Breathe with me," he said softly, his hand a steady pressure on Magnus' back. "Just like that. You're safe. I'm here." That moment lingered between them for days. Magnus caught Axton looking at him during quiet moments, his expression troubled, as if fighting an internal battle. When their hands brushed during security briefings or car rides, neither pulled away quite as quickly as before. It was becoming harder for both of them to maintain their professional distance. During a morning run in the hills above Los Angeles, Axton helped Magnus over a rough patch of trail, their hands lingering together longer than necessary. At script readings, Magnus would catch Axton mouthing his lines along with him, having memorized them from countless rehearsals. The turning point came during an awards ceremony in New York. Magnus was giving his acceptance speech when Axton noticed a disturbance in the crowd. Without causing panic, he expertly extracted Magnus from the situation, leading him through back corridors to safety. Later, they learned that a stalker had managed to slip past event security with a knife. In the aftermath, sitting in the quiet of Magnus' hotel suite, Axton's professional facade cracked. "I almost failed you today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Failed me? Axton, you saved me. I should have spotted him sooner. If anything had happened to you..." Axton trailed off, running a hand over his face. Magnus moved closer, drawn by this rare display of vulnerability. "Why would it matter so much? I'm just another client." Axton looked at him then, really looked at him, and Magnus saw everything Axton had been trying to hide behind his professional demeanor. "You've never been just another client, Alex." The use of his first name, spoken in Axton's deep voice, made Magnus' heart skip. He moved closer, watching Axton's careful control waver. "I've been waiting months to hear you say that." "I've been fighting it for months," Axton admitted, his voice rough. "Everything I was taught about maintaining professional distance. But you made it impossible. Every day watching you, protecting you, being near you." "Then stop fighting," Magnus said softly, reaching out to touch Axton's face. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what's between us. Aren't you? Axton leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. God, yes. When he opened his eyes again, they were full of determination. I'm not just protecting a client anymore. I'm protecting the man I've fallen in love with. Magnus' breath caught. Say it again. I love you, Axton said, more confident now. I think I have since that night in the kitchen when you talked about drowning in fame and I wanted to be your anchor. They spent that night talking until dawn, sharing all the moments they'd held back from each other. Axton confessed how he'd memorized Magnus' schedule not just for security, but to steal extra minutes in his presence. Magnus admitted to deliberately breaking security protocols sometimes just to see Axton's protective instincts flare. Their relationship blossomed quickly after that. The months of restraint giving way, Axton moved into the penthouse officially, though he insisted on maintaining his professional role during public events. I can love you and protect you at the same time, he said firmly. Their daily routine shifted into something more natural. Mornings began with shared coffee on the balcony. Axton still scanning the perimeter but now doing it one-handed, his other hand entwined with Magnus. Security briefings turned into quiet moments of connection. Axton's professional updates peppered with gentle touches and fond looks. During a publicity tour in Europe, they found themselves with a free afternoon in Paris. They walked along the Seine, Axton pointing out potential security risks out of habit while Magnus teased him. You know what I love about you? Magnus said, stopping to face him. How you can't turn off wanting to keep me safe even now. Axton pulled him closer. Public display of affection be damned. It's not just about keeping you safe anymore. It's about keeping us safe. What we have. It's everything to me. Back home, they settled into a rhythm. Axton still commanded Magnus' security team with military precision, but now their evenings are for themselves. The media caught on eventually. Speculation about the actor and his bodyguard ran wild, but they handled it together. During Magnus' first interview after the news broke, he spoke proudly about finding love in an unexpected place. He still scares away overeager fans, Magnus told the interviewer, smiling. But now he also makes me breakfast and argues with me about literature. Axton, watching from the wings, couldn't keep the smile from his face. Later that night, he presented Magnus with a copy of East of Eden inscribed with a note. To the man who taught me that the strongest armor is letting yourself be loved. I used to think vulnerability was a weakness, Axton said, watching Magnus read the inscription. You showed me it's the greatest strength we have. Magnus looked up at him, eyes bright. And you showed me that true protection isn't about keeping dangers out. It's about letting the right person in. Axton had come into Magnus' life as a shield against danger, but he had become the very thing Magnus had needed most. Someone who saw past the fame and the glamour to the person beneath. Someone who protected not just his body but his heart.